potential that lies within every single human being is enormous. Enormous, enormous. I believe that we don't even scratch the surface of actualizing the potential that has been invested in us. And clearly, the reason why this potential has been invested in us is because we are supposed to make the most with it. We have an obligation to do the most with that which God invested within us. And in order for us to be able to do that, we need to accept who we are. And when I say accept who we are, I mean accept who we were made to be. To accept that God designed us and that God invested in us. And He did that because He is expecting of us. And so we carry this enormous responsibility to try and actualize as much of what He invested within us as we possibly can. And it's much easier for us to simply say, I'm doing my best, and not take that responsibility. It's much easier for us to think that I'm really not that capable, and therefore there isn't that much I can do. But it's the responsible person that actually steps forward and says, I know that God invested so much more in me. I know it's so scary to discover, to go deeply within myself and discover that potential and then actualize it. I know that there are going to be many steps of failure and all these other types of fears that this will bring up. And I also know that it's my responsibility and my duty to do this. And some people may feel like this is very arrogant, like, what this is about actualizing yourself and maximizing who you are and making yourself into a great person. And that may be true if it's about me becoming a great person. But when we are talking about what God invested within me and doing justice to what is expected of me, which is why it was given to me, there's no arrogance there at all. There's actually dedication and commitment and responsibility to what God has invested within us. And that there's nothing more beautiful and more important than someone taking on this responsibility. And so we find that the very first instruction God gives to Abraham is expressed in two words. Lech Lecha. Go for yourself. And God tells him to leave his birthplace, his homeland, to the land which I will show you. God says, pick yourself up from the environment you know, the comfort that you know, and start traveling. I'll tell you where you're going. Now imagine if someone were to tell you to just pack up your home right now, put everything onto a truck, and start driving east, right? Or drive or west, or whatever it is, right? Just go, and I'll let you know. You say, well, 1 second, but where am I going? And is this going to work out? And what's going to happen? But what God was giving to Abraham was the opportunity for him to discover that if God is giving him this instruction, he just needs to follow through. Because the word Lech Lecha does not only mean to go for yourself, Lecha can also mean to yourself. And what God was indicating to Abraham was that the way you will be able to do those things which people find so difficult to do sometimes what some people would sometimes describe as the impossible thing to do, is when you go to yourself. When you truly look honestly into yourself and you discover the divine capability that you have, the capability that was given to you by the Almighty, you will honestly be able to tell yourself, I can do this. And there is nothing more powerful than a person realizing that what is invested within us is far deeper than our natural capabilities. We have extraordinary capabilities. And the more we recognize that, the more extraordinary we can perform and accomplish as is expected of us. There's a fascinating story with the Bluzhever Rebbe, a great Hasidic master, who was in a concentration camp. His wife and children were all killed out. He survived. And when he was in the concentration camp, there was another Jew that befriended him. And this other Jew was an agnostic. He didn't know whether there was a God or not, wasn't sure what to believe, and especially in a concentration camp. That's not quite the most supportive environment for believing in God. And he would have, being a more philosophical type of a person, he would have many philosophical conversations with the Bluzhever Rebbe. And they would talk and engage all the time. He was fascinated by this Rebbe whose faith did not falter despite being in a concentration camp. One day they were awakened to the yelling and screaming. Everyone get up and go out to the field. And so they all went out to the field, and in the field they saw a huge pit that was dug. And they all knew what that meant. That meant they're all going to be shot to death and fall into that at the edge of the pit, and they fall right in. That's where they're going to be buried. And they realized this was their end. But that day, something unique took place. The Nazis told them that everyone go line up by the edge of the pit, and whoever can jump across the pit will not be killed. Whoever falls into the pit will be shot to death. And this was just another game the Nazis were playing with the Jews. And so here the Bluzhever Rebbe was standing, and his agnostic friend found his way to stand by his side. And his agnostic friend turned to him and said, "So, Rebbe, what are you going to do? Are you going to make a mockery of yourself in the last moments of your life and try and even jump over? On a good day, a healthy person who has an excellent jump may be able to make it over. Here we are emaciated and weak." The Bluzhever Rebbe looked down on his legs, and they were swollen. And the agnostic gentleman said, "There's no way we're going to jump. Shouldn't we just fall in so as not to give them this last moment of pleasure?" And the Bluzhever Rebbe turned to him and said, "When God gives someone an opportunity, we need to make the best of it. We need to do our best, and God will do the rest. If God gave us the opportunity to jump, let's jump. Effort is our department. Results is God's department." And so the Bluzhever Rebbe closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them and mustered all of the strength he could find, and he jumped. And a moment later, lo and behold, there was solid ground under his feet. He found himself miraculously standing on the other side with the few others that had actually made it across. What was even more surprising was that right next to him was standing his agnostic friend. The agnostic friend turns to the Rebbe and he says, "Rebbe, how did you get here? You have swollen feet, you're emaciated." And the Rebbe said, "I grabbed onto the coattails of my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and all my ancestors. And that's what carried me across." And he turned to his agnostic friend and said, "And how did you get here?" And the agnostic friend said, "Rebbe, I held on to your coattails." You see, here was a moment where an individual didn't resign himself to his ordinary capabilities, because he knew that we are invested with extraordinary capabilities. We just need to close our eyes for a moment and remind ourselves that we are far greater than we realize. And you know, sometimes we don't have that within us on a conscious level, but we can hang out with someone else who does. And maybe it's not we consciously felt within ourselves, but we could ride on the coattails of the person next to us. And we do that enough until we begin to feel it ourselves, and we begin to make much more powerful and courageous choices. and we begin to actualize the potential God invested in us, living up to that expected responsibility from us.